What if the Jedi Council tried to assassinate Palpatine to stop an external audit of their finances? What would happen then? So this unusual story will be taking place a short while after the events of Attack of the Clones. Let's begin. As the evening sun cast long shadows across the Jedi Council chamber, Obi-Wan Kenobi shifted slightly in his seat. Despite the months that had passed since his promotion following the Battle of Geonosis, he still felt a twinge of discomfort at his elevated status. Around him, the other council members sat in tense silence for this emergency meeting called by Mace Windu to begin. His gaze drifted to Master Windu, who remained fixated on a datapad, occasionally glancing towards Master Yoda. Obi-Wan studied the ancient Jedi Master's face, trying to decipher his expression. Yoda's usual serene demeanor was absent, replaced by something Obi-Wan could only describe as troubled. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft hum of Coruscant's never-ending traffic beyond the temple walls. Obi-Wan's thoughts briefly turned to Anakin, who was somewhere within the temple, likely training or tinkering with droids. Suddenly, Mace Windu stood, his movement drawing Obi-Wan's attention back to the present. The Corran Master strode to the center of the circular chamber, his traditional Jedi robes swaying with each step. Mace's face was a mask of barely contained frustration as he addressed the council. "Masters," he began, his deep voice resonating through the chamber, "I've called this meeting to address a grave threat to the very foundation of our order." Mace Windu's stern gaze swept across the chamber before he continued, "It has come to my attention that our order's tax filings for the last standard fiscal year are incorrect." His eyes flickered briefly towards Master Yoda. "As you all know, we typically file Form PX401A, which classifies us as a galactic peacekeeping and spiritual guidance organization under the Coruscant Tax Code, Section 47.3. This classification usually requires only a small internal audit, given our unique status." Obi-Wan listened intently, trying to grasp the significance of the situation. Mace continued, his voice growing more intense. "However, it appears that Form PX402B, typically used for-profit corporations, was approved and filed instead." He paused, letting the information sink in. "This form was submitted under the authorization code of the Grand Master." Obi-Wan glanced at Master Yoda, whose eyes were closed, his expression unreadable. He wondered why this clerical error was such a big concern. "You must be wondering why this is such a big concern," Mace continued. "The answer lies in the Republic Financial Transparency Act, specifically Article 12, Subsection 8. He activated a holoprojector, displaying the relevant text. It states, "Any discrepancy in tax classification for organizations with galactic-scale operations and resources shall trigger a mandatory external financial audit to ensure proper allocation and use of funds." Mace's voice took on a serious tone. "This means that very soon, the Republic's Financial Oversight Committee will dispatch auditors to comb through every credit that has passed through our order in the last decade. They'll scrutinize our funding sources, resource allocation, and every financial decision we've made." At this point, Obi-Wan spoke up. "I'm afraid I don't quite understand, Master Windu. Why would an external audit be such a significant issue for our order?" Mace turned to Obi-Wan, his expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. As Obi-Wan glanced around the chamber, he noticed similar looks falling over the features of the other council members. A sense of unease crept over him as he realized there was clearly something he was missing. "Well, Master Kenobi," Mace said, his tone measured, "I believe the Grand Master should be the one to explain why an external audit, possibly conducted by Munes, would be problematic." Obi-Wan's gaze shifted to Master Yoda, who met his eyes with an uncharacteristic, half-hearted smile. "A delicate matter this is," Yoda began, his gravelly voice tinged with what Obi-Wan could only describe as discomfort. "Master Obi-Wan, as of late, certain expenses the Order has had..." Yoda paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Mind-expanding substances I have procured for deep Force meditation and heightened awareness. Essential they are." Obi-Wan's confusion deepened as he tried to decipher Yoda's cryptic explanation. Before he could voice his questions, Mace interjected, his patience clearly exhausted. "Enough with the cryptic explanations," Mace snapped, his annoyance palpable. He turned to address Obi-Wan directly, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. "Master Yoda's mistake has put us all at risk, Obi-Wan. The truth is, he's been secretly diverting the Order's funds to purchase death sticks and spice." Obi-Wan's jaw dropped as Mace continued, his tone growing more severe. "His trips to Kashyyyk are not just diplomatic missions. It's the Wookiees who have been supplying some of these substances to the Grand Master." Obi-Wan glanced around, noting the grim expressions on his fellow council members' faces. This was clearly not news to most of them. Mace pressed on, his voice laced with frustration. "We've managed to keep this under wraps because we controlled our own audits. But now, thanks to this filing error, we're facing an external audit. If the Munes get their hands on our financial records, it's not just Yoda who'll face consequences. It's the entire Order." Yoda sat in uncharacteristic silence, his ears drooped low, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Obi-Wan, still reeling from the revelation, managed to find his voice. What? He paused, trying to collect his thoughts. Why didn't anyone do anything about this? Mace sighed heavily. "We tried, Obi-Wan, but without these mind expansion items," Mace said, shooting a pointed look at Yoda, "things get complicated. We attempted an intervention. It didn't go well. Master Yoda accused the Council of treason, yelled that he was the Council, and then..." Mace paused, as if struggling to believe his own words. "He leapt at us, only to trip, hit his head, and end up in Bacta for 2 weeks." Obi-Wan's eyes widened in disbelief. "We covered up his absence as a meditation retreat," Mace added. "After that, Yoda's old. We just let him be." Yoda shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "As bad as Master Windu says, it was not," he muttered. "Regardless," Mace cut in sharply, "if this audit happens, the entire High Council will face severe consequences." He activated a datapad, reading from it. "According to Galactic Law Section 47, subsection 12, misappropriation of funds by religious or peacekeeping organizations will result in immediate loss of status, seizure of assets, and potential imprisonment for all leadership members." Obi-Wan, still struggling to process everything, asked weakly, "What do we do, Master?" Mace's expression turned grim. "That, Master Kenobi, is precisely why we're here. We need to find a way to prevent this audit from happening by any means necessary." Obi-Wan couldn't help but notice the stress Mace placed on "any means necessary." Mace's expression hardened as he stood at the center of the chamber. "There's no point in sugarcoating it," he said grimly. "Given 2 weeks or so, we could probably disguise the fraudulent transactions as something less problematic, avoiding the harshest penalties. But there's a complication. Our reliable sources indicate that a Snap Audit could happen in less than a week." "What can we possibly do in such a short time?" Obi-Wan asked, his voice tinged with concern. Mace turned to Yoda. "I believe we should inform Master Kenobi of our plan," he said to the Grand Master. Yoda's ears twitched as he began a philosophical ramble. "For the herd to survive, sometimes distract the prey it must," Yoda mused. "In times of survival, pragmatic one must be. The path of the Jedi, not always straight it is. Like the river, bend and flow we must. When faced with the storm, shelter we seek. In the garden of the Force, sometimes prune the tree we must, for new growth to flourish. Balance, in all things we..." "Enough," Mace interjected, his patience clearly at its end. His voice rose as he stood firm in the center of the chamber. "We have to kill the Chancellor." The room fell into stunned silence. Obi-Wan felt as if the air had been sucked out of the chamber. Mace continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "His death will surely delay all Republic operations for at least a month. It would give us the time we need to fix Yoda's mess." "This is ridiculous," Obi-Wan protested, rising to his feet. But to his surprise, none of the other council members seemed too concerned by this plan. "There must be another way. We can't seriously be considering assassinating the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic." Mace's expression remained stern. "This isn't the first time we've had to take extreme measures, Obi-Wan. Besides," he paused, his voice lowering, "Palpatine is actually a Sith Lord. He is Darth Sidious." "What?" Obi-Wan asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and shock. He looked around the chamber, expecting to see similar reactions from the other council members, but was met with grim, knowing expressions. Mace sighed. "We couldn't inform you earlier, Obi-Wan. It was classified information, and you were away from the temple last week when we made this discovery." Obi-Wan's brow furrowed in confusion. "But how exactly did you find out?" At this, Yoda's face suddenly lit up. "Clarity the spice gave me," he said, his voice taking on an excited tone. "A vision of the future I had. Palpatine, throwing Windu out a window, I saw. Ordering the clones to kill all Jedi, he did." Before Obi-Wan could process this bizarre explanation, Mace interjected, his voice dripping with disdain. "It was your chosen one apprentice, Obi-Wan. He betrayed me. Some chosen one he turned out to be. Chosen to be an absolute failure." Yoda suddenly perked up. "Credit I deserve," he exclaimed, thumping his Geimer stick on the floor. "Saved the galaxy my spice addiction has. Without it, blind to the Sith Lord we would be." Ki-Adi-Mundi cleared his throat, his tall forehead creasing as he addressed the room diplomatically. "While we appreciate the unexpected benefits of Master Yoda's habits," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I feel compelled to point out that the original intent behind consuming these substances was not to uncover the identity of the Sith Lord. It would be disingenuous to attribute credit for this discovery to actions that were not initially aimed at such a goal. Obi-Wan's head was spinning. The revelations about Anakin, Palpatine, and now this debate over Yoda's drug-induced visions were almost too much to process. Mace, seemingly frustrated with the tangent, raised his voice to bring the meeting back into focus. "The point is," he said firmly, "Palpatine has to go, so that we may survive." "I find it hard to believe Anakin would betray you, Master Windu," Obi-Wan said, his voice laced with skepticism. "He may be impulsive at times, but his loyalty to the Jedi Order has never wavered." Mace's face hardened. "Your faith in your Padawan is admirable, Obi-Wan, but misplaced." The vision was clear. Obi-Wan opened his mouth to argue further, but Ki-Adi-Mundi interrupted, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps we should focus on the more pressing matter at hand. If we are to take such drastic action against the Chancellor, how exactly do we propose to carry it out?" "We'll need Anakin's help," Mace said. "Like it or not, Skywalker has a connection with Palpatine. The Chancellor sees him as a friend, or at least pretends to. That could give us the opening we need." Obi-Wan's brow furrowed, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of involving his Padawan in an assassination plot. "Master Windu, I must object. Anakin is our best chance," Mace interrupted firmly. Mace continued, his voice taking on a solemn tone. "If Anakin is indeed the chosen one, as we've long believed, and not the traitor from Yoda's vision, then helping us now would align with his supposed destiny." Obi-Wan fell silent, contemplating Mace's words. The prophecy echoed in his mind. "In the time of greatest despair, a child shall be born who will destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force." If Anakin truly was the chosen one, wasn't this precisely the moment he was meant for? The internal conflict was evident on Obi-Wan's face as he wrestled with the implications. Seeing Obi-Wan's silence and interpreting it as acquiescence, Mace nodded decisively. "It seems Master Kenobi sees reason," he announced to the Council, not giving Obi-Wan a chance to voice any lingering doubts. "Now let's discuss our next steps." The tension in the room thickened as the Council members exchanged uneasy glances. Mace Windu's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the chamber, his posture rigid and commanding. "We need to decide how best to utilize Anakin Skywalker in this delicate matter. We have limited time, so every move must be precise." Obi-Wan spoke up at this. "Master Windu, Anakin sees Palpatine as a friend. Convincing him to take such drastic action against someone he trusts, it's not something we can achieve quickly, if at all. Given our time constraints, I don't see how we could possibly get Anakin on board with this." Obi-Wan hoped that his words might steer the Council toward a less extreme course of action, but Mace merely nodded, his expression unyielding, his mind clearly working through new calculations. "You're right, Obi-Wan," he said, his voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of time to sway Anakin's loyalty. If we can't convince him, then we need to work within the constraints we have." He turned to the rest of the Council, his tone now more resolute. "We need to alter our approach. Instead of relying on convincing Anakin, we must guide him without his knowledge. We need to use him without revealing our true intentions. The question now becomes, how do we get Anakin to act against Palpatine, without him realizing the full extent of what we're asking?" Ki-Adi-Mundi leaned forward. "We must approach this with utmost precision," he began, his voice smooth and measured. "If Anakin cannot be persuaded directly, then we must explore more indirect avenues. Within the Jedi archives, there are records of many ancient and deadly diseases, some so obscure that even the most learned Sith would not recognize them." Mace Windu's eyes narrowed as he considered Ki-Adi-Mundi's words. "If we were to use one of these ancient diseases, how would we ensure Anakin's safety?" Mace questioned. "The archives contain not only the diseases themselves, but also their antidotes," Ki-Adi-Mundi replied. "We could administer an antidote to Anakin without his knowledge, protecting him from the effects of the disease. Once he is inoculated, we could then expose him to the pathogen. He would remain unharmed, but anyone in close proximity, including Palpatine, would not be so fortunate." Mace seemed to ponder Ki-Adi-Mundi's suggestion for a moment, his hand resting thoughtfully on his chin. The idea had a certain twisted logic to it, and the risk, though significant, could potentially be minimized with careful planning. Suddenly, Obi-Wan stood up, his expression one of utter disbelief. "This whole plan is ridiculous," he exclaimed. The other Council members turned their attention to him, surprised by the outburst from someone usually so measured. "If Palpatine is indeed a Sith, why can't we simply walk into his office and take him into custody? We have more than enough evidence now, especially with what Yoda has seen in his visions." Obi-Wan's voice was firm, laced with a blend of urgency and logic. Arresting him would not only remove the immediate threat, but would also deal with the audit issue. The death or arrest of the Chancellor would bring the Republic to a standstill, long enough for us to correct the financial discrepancies. There's no need for subterfuge or risking Anakin in such a convoluted scheme. Obi-Wan's words lingered in the air. Mace Windu regarded him with a measured gaze, then slowly shook his head. Obi-Wan, I understand your frustration and your desire to take decisive action, but the situation is far more complex than simply walking into Palpatine's office and placing him under arrest. He took a step forward, his voice growing more somber as he began to lay out the harsh realities. Palpatine has entrenched himself deeply within the fabric of the Republic. His influence extends into every corner of the government, and he's carefully cultivated an image of being the Republic's most stalwart defender. The trust and loyalty he commands are immense, not just among the Senate, but also among the military and the general populace. To most, he's the hero who's been steering the galaxy through this war. Any move against him would be seen as an act of treason, especially by those who don't understand the true nature of the Sith. We have to consider the legal and political ramifications of our actions. For one, Force visions, even those from someone as wise as Master Yoda, are not admissible as evidence in a court of law. The judicial process demands tangible proof, documents, recordings, witnesses. Being a Sith in itself is not illegal under Republic law. In fact, the vast majority of people don't even know what a Sith is. He began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, and even if we could somehow present our suspicions, Palpatine has likely covered his tracks so thoroughly that any accusations would seem baseless, the ravings of a paranoid order grasping at shadows. He's a master manipulator, Obi-Wan, and any direct action against him without undeniable evidence would only strengthen his position. The public would rally to his defense, seeing us as the aggressors. The Senate would turn against us, and the Jedi Order would be painted as traitors, attempting to overthrow the legitimate government. Mace's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Obi-Wan. I know it's difficult, Obi-Wan. We're all struggling with this, but we must be smart about how we proceed. The stakes are too high to allow our emotions to dictate our actions. We must be as cunning as the enemy we face. Obi-Wan considered Mace's words carefully, his mind working through the complexities of the situation. He knew the risks involved in a direct confrontation, but he also saw an opportunity that might strike a balance between caution and action. Master Windu, Obi-Wan began, what if we went to Palpatine's office and confronted him directly, but with a subtle difference? We could secretly record the entire encounter using a small holocam concealed within our robes. He paused, allowing the idea to sink in before continuing. If Palpatine is truly the Sith Lord we believe him to be, then confronting him directly might provoke him into revealing his true nature. Sith are driven by emotion, by pride and anger. If he feels cornered, he may lash out, and that would be our opportunity. We could arrest him right then and there, and with the holocam recording everything, we would have irrefutable evidence of his actions. Evidence that could be presented to the Senate and the Republic. Obi-Wan's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the other council members. This approach reduces the volatility of the situation by removing Anakin from the equation. As he looked around for approval, he noticed an almost annoyed expression on the faces of his fellow Jedi. Obi-Wan couldn't quite discern what had caused it. Had he missed something? Doubt gnawed at him for a brief moment, but before he could dwell on it, Mace Windu spoke up. Well, that could work, Obi-Wan, but... Before Mace could finish, Obi-Wan jumped up, his voice filled with determination. Then let's do it. There's no point in delaying. If we have a chance to expose Palpatine and bring him to justice, we should act now. The other Jedi remained silent, neither objecting nor offering support, and Obi-Wan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But before he could question it further, Yoda spoke. Fine, go we will to Palpatine's office, Yoda said, his voice carrying a note of finality. Reveal our suspicions, we will. And if he attacks, take him in, we must. Present the recording to the Senate, we shall. Mace sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire galaxy. He nodded, his expression resigned. All right then, Obi-Wan, we will do this. But, Mace added, his tone cautious, Palpatine might try to deceive us, to twist the situation in his favor. If he does, we should back off and consider the stealthier plans involving Anakin. We can't afford to be reckless. Obi-Wan nodded. Who else will go with us? He asked, looking around the chamber. Who else will be joining Master Windu, myself, and Master Yoda? Ki-Adi-Mundi, Kit Fisto, and Shakti slowly stood up, after looking at each other for a short moment. We will join you, they said, their voices steady with resolve. Mace turned to the remaining council members. The rest of you should stay here, in case the temple defenses need to be engaged. We must be prepared for any eventuality. As Mace spoke, Obi-Wan looked out the large windows of the High Council chamber, noticing how the light of day had almost entirely faded. The Coruscant skyline, bathed in the deep hues of twilight, seemed to reflect the ominous mood within the council chamber. The vibrant city below, usually full of life, now appeared shadowed, as if the planet itself sensed the impending confrontation. After the plan was decided, the council members quietly prepared themselves. Obi-Wan carefully equipped the miniature holocam, ensuring it was securely hidden within the folds of his robe. The tiny device, nearly invisible, could be the key to capturing crucial evidence against Palpatine. With the holocam in place, Obi-Wan joined the other Jedi as they headed to the landing platform. The shuttle awaited them, and they boarded without hesitation. The ride to the Republic Executive Building was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the shuttle's engines. When they landed, the Jedi disembarked and moved swiftly through the grand corridors of the Executive Building. The halls were eerily quiet, an unsettling backdrop to their mission. As they approached the doors leading to the Chancellor's office, Obi-Wan's senses heightened. As the large door slid open with a soft hiss, the Jedi stepped into the dimly lit office of Chancellor Palpatine. Obi-Wan felt a sudden surge of doubt as they entered. What if Palpatine didn't attack? What if he maintained his composure, denied everything, and they were left standing there with nothing but accusations? They would have lost the element of surprise, and the entire plan would be in jeopardy. The thought gnawed at him, and he wondered why none of the other Jedi had raised this concern. But before he could dwell on it further, Palpatine's voice cut through his thoughts. "Ah, Masters," Palpatine greeted them, his tone warm and inviting as he looked up from his desk. "What brings you to my office at this hour? Is there something urgent that requires my attention?" Obi-Wan stepped forward, the others remaining slightly behind him. "Chancellor," Obi-Wan began, "we have come to discuss a matter of great importance, one that concerns the very future of the Republic." Palpatine's smile remained, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or a deeper, more guarded emotion. The future of the Republic? That sounds rather ominous, Master Kenobi. Please do go on. Obi-Wan continued, his focus now fully on the man before him. "Chancellor, we have uncovered evidence that suggests a grave threat to the Republic. This threat has been growing in the shadows, manipulating events to further its own ends." Palpatine's expression remained calm, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "A threat from within? That is indeed concerning. I trust the Jedi have this situation under control?" Obi-Wan pressed on, his voice growing firmer. "The threat we speak of, Chancellor, is not just any threat. It is the Sith. We have reason to believe that the Sith have returned and have been working in secret to undermine the Republic from within. And we believe that the leader of this dark force is someone very close to the heart of the government." Palpatine's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "The Sith? Surely, Master Kenobi, you do not mean to imply that I have some connection to these ancient enemies of the Jedi? That would be a most serious accusation." Obi-Wan's expression remained stern, unwavering. "It is more than an implication, Chancellor. The evidence we have gathered points directly to you, the Sith Lord we have been searching for. The one who has been pulling the strings behind this war is you." Palpatine's eyes narrowed, and the warmth in his voice began to fade. "These are dangerous words, Master Kenobi. Words that could have severe consequences. I would advise you to tread carefully." As the meeting went on, Palpatine's smile vanished completely, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You overestimate your ability to see through the complexities of the situation, Master Kenobi. The galaxy is in chaos, and difficult decisions must be made. But to accuse me of being a Sith Lord, that is nothing short of absurd," he eventually said. Obi-Wan took another step forward, his voice now laced with accusation. "Absurd? The Sith are masters of deception, of hiding in plain sight. For years you have manipulated the Senate, the war, and even the Jedi Order, all to further your own dark agenda. But now the truth is out. We know who you are." The other Jedi in the room exchanged glances, their expressions growing more concerned as the tension escalated. Palpatine, for his part, noticed this shift. He was an expert at reading the room, and he could sense the resolve in Obi-Wan, a resolve that bordered on inevitability. As Obi-Wan continued to speak, it became clear to Palpatine that these Jedi knew more than they were letting on. They weren't simply here to confront him with accusations. They had come with the full intention of ending his life, if necessary. The Jedi were not fools. They would not have come here with such accusations unless they were prepared to act on them. He could feel their determination, a silent agreement that, if pushed, they would do whatever it took to stop him. And yet, there was something else, something that caught Palpatine's attention. He could sense a mix of concern, surprise, and perhaps even hesitation in the other Jedi. They hadn't expected the conversation to turn so quickly toward open conflict, and that gave Palpatine a brief moment to strategize. He knew that his true identity had been exposed. The Jedi had come to kill him, and if he didn't act first, he would lose the upper hand. Palpatine slowly began to shift his position, moving away from his desk. He needed to place himself in a spot that would give him the best advantage in the imminent confrontation. The desk, large and ornate, stood between him and the Jedi, but it would only serve as a temporary obstacle. He edged slightly to the right, closer to Obi-Wan, calculating the distance and the angle needed for his initial strike. Obi-Wan stood at the forefront, his lightsaber unlit, but his hand hovering near the hilt. His expression was one of unwavering focus, prepared for whatever was about to happen. Behind him, Mace Windu was slightly to his left, his own posture tense and ready. Mace's eyes were fixed on Palpatine, watching for any sign of movement. To Mace's left, Yoda stood with his Geimer stick in hand. The small Jedi Master's eyes were half closed, as if in deep contemplation. But Sidious knew better than to underestimate him. Kit Fisto, Shaak Ti, and Ki-Adi-Mundi formed a loose semicircle behind Obi-Wan and Mace, their positions carefully chosen to cover multiple angles of attack. They were spread out just enough to prevent being caught in a single strike, but close enough to support each other. Palpatine's move to the right brought him near the edge of the desk, where he could easily pivot into a defensive stance while simultaneously putting him in close proximity to Obi-Wan. The Jedi's positioning indicated they were prepared for a direct assault, but Palpatine knew he had the element of surprise in his speed and ferocity. Finally, the tension snapped. Palpatine, his crimson lightsaber igniting in an instant, lunged at Obi-Wan. The red blade hissed to life, casting a menacing glow across the room as it arced toward Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's reflexes were honed to perfection. His blue lightsaber sprang to life just in time to parry the attack. The sound of clashing lightsabers filled the room, the battle beginning with the flurry of strikes and counterstrikes. Mace Windu, Yoda, and the others quickly joined the fray, their lightsabers igniting in unison as they moved to engage the Sith Lord. The Jedi attacked from multiple angles, each of them coordinating their strikes with the precision that only years of training and mastery of the Force could bring. But Sidious was prepared. His movements were a blur, each strike deflected with a speed and accuracy that only the dark side could bestow. The battle raged fiercely within the confines of the Chancellor's office. Sidious fought with a vicious, unpredictable style. He alternated between offense and defense, forcing the Jedi to stay on their guard. Every swing of his lightsaber was aimed to maim or kill, and yet the Jedi held their ground, matching him blow for blow. Yoda darted in and out, his smaller size making him harder to target, while Kit Fisto and Shaak Ti coordinated their attacks from opposite sides, hoping to catch Sidious off balance. Ki-Adi-Mundi and Obi-Wan maintained a steady barrage of strikes, their blades moving with a fluidity that forced the Sith Lord to constantly adjust his defense. Mace Windu, however, was the most relentless. His unique technique, Vapad, a form that channeled his inner darkness into a controlled fury, allowed him to meet Sidious's aggression with his own. Realizing he was outnumbered and his position increasingly untenable, Sidious saw his opportunity to escape. With a sudden, fierce blast of Force lightning, he shattered the large window behind him, sending shards of transparasteel flying into the night air. The sudden explosion momentarily blinded the Jedi, and Sidious used the distraction to leap backward out of the window, his cloak billowing in the wind. But the Jedi were ready. Mace Windu acted quickly. Extending his hand, he reached out with the Force and caught Sidious in midair. The Sith Lord was pulled back into the room, crashing into the ground with a thud, his escape thwarted. Sidious scrambled to his feet, rage contorting his features as he realized the Jedi had outmaneuvered him. He launched himself back into the fray, fighting with renewed fury. But Mace Windu was already analyzing the situation with his unique gift, the ability to perceive shatter points, the flaws in any situation or being that could be exploited to bring about a decisive outcome. As the battle continued, Mace's eyes narrowed, his focus intensifying as he sought out the shatter point within Sidious himself. He could see it, the subtle flaw in Sidious's defense, a weakness that even the Sith Lord wasn't fully aware of. It was small, almost imperceptible, but Mace knew that exploiting it would bring the fight to an end. Sidious lunged at Mace with a ferocious overhead strike, but Mace was ready. Instead of meeting the attack head-on, he sidestepped at the last possible moment, letting Sidious's momentum carry him forward. With a precise and powerful downward strike, Mace aimed directly at the shatter point he had perceived. A tiny flaw in Sidious's aggressive form, a subtle misalignment in his stance caused by his overextension. The strike hit home with devastating effect. Sidious's lightsaber flew from his grasp as the imbalance sent shockwaves through his body. The Sith Lord staggered, his face contorted in shock and pain as Mace's lightsaber cut through the defenses he had so carefully constructed. Mace followed through with another strike, this time aimed at Sidious's chest. The blade pierced through his dark robes, burning through flesh and bone. The Sith Lord let out a guttural scream, the sound reverberating through the room as the dark side energy within him collapsed like a house of cards. With one final, agonizing cry, Sidious fell to the ground, his body twitching as the life drained from him. Mace Windu stood over the fallen Sith Lord, his chest heaving with exertion. The others gathered around. They had done it. They had defeated the greatest threat the galaxy had known in a millennium. As Obi-Wan approached the other Jedi, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. But as he looked at the others, Mace Windu, Yoda, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Kit Fisto, and Shaak Ti, he realized that their faces were not filled with triumph, but rather with a stunned, almost disbelieving silence. Obi-Wan had expected some sense of elation, perhaps even joy, at having finally rid the galaxy of the Sith, but what he saw instead was a collective shock. It was as if they hadn't truly believed this outcome was possible. Days passed, and the recording Obi-Wan had made of the confrontation spread like wildfire across the galaxy through the holonet. Every corner of the Republic saw Sidious for who he really was, and the Jedi Order was vindicated in the eyes of many. There were no accusations of treason, no claims of a Jedi coup. The truth had been laid bare, and the galaxy knew that the Jedi had acted to protect the Republic from a great evil. Yet, despite Sidious's death, the Clone Wars continued under Count Dooku's leadership. Anakin, upon hearing of Sidious's true identity and the events that had unfolded, was shaken. The news had hit him hard, and for a time he withdrew into himself, struggling to process it all. But gradually, with the support of his friends and fellow Jedi, Anakin began to recover, though a shadow seemed to linger over him. And as for the external audit, it was delayed long enough to alter all the fraudulent transactions, saving the High Council from severe legal actions. During this time, Obi-Wan found himself increasingly puzzled. He replayed the events in his mind, from the moment Mace Windu revealed Palpatine to be Sidious, to the moment the Sith Lord was struck down. The reaction of the council members during and after the battle nagged at him. Their expressions, those stunned, disbelieving faces, kept coming back to him, unsettling his thoughts. The more Obi-Wan dwelled on it, the more uneasy he became. Something didn't add up. Why had the council, the most powerful and wise beings he had ever known, been so shocked by Sidious's death? Why had they seemed so unprepared? These thoughts churned relentlessly in Obi-Wan's mind, a puzzle that refused to be solved. Then, one day, during a routine council meeting, as Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke about some mundane matter, it all suddenly clicked into place for Obi-Wan. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, overwhelming and undeniable. His eyes widened in shock, and without thinking, he shot to his feet. "You didn't know," Obi-Wan yelled, his voice echoing through the council chamber. The shock of his own realization struck him with such force that he felt as if the very ground beneath him had shifted. The room fell into a tense silence as every member of the Jedi Council turned to face him, their expressions a mix of guilt, discomfort, and something else, something that confirmed his worst suspicions. Obi-Wan's eyes darted from one face to another. "You didn't know," he repeated, this time with a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "You had no idea that Palpatine was Sidious. You wanted to kill him to save yourselves from the audit. It all makes sense now," Obi-Wan continued. "You feared openly confronting him because you thought he was just some normal being who you can't just walk in and destroy. No, you needed to hide your tracks, hence your push for a stealthy assassination. And when Sidious finally drew his saber and attacked, you were all shocked, because you had no clue he was capable of that." Obi-Wan's eyes locked onto Yoda, who had remained silent, his expression inscrutable. "And all this talk of your Force vision," Obi-Wan said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "The vision of Anakin betraying the Order, of Mace being thrown out of a window, it was all fabricated, wasn't it? Just a story to convince me to manipulate Anakin." Yoda shifted slightly, his small form seemingly shrinking under Obi-Wan's relentless gaze. He hesitated for a moment before speaking, his voice unusually subdued. "No choice we had, Master Obi-Wan. Went along with your plan, we did. Because dismiss it, we could not. No reasonable way to argue against it, we had." Obi-Wan's eyes flared with anger as he cut Yoda off. "No reasonable way to argue against it? You could have simply said it would ruin the element of surprise if Palpatine didn't attack." Yoda's eyes widened slightly in realization, and for once he had no clever retort. "Oh," he muttered, falling silent once more. Finally, Mace Windu stood up, his face drawn but resolute. "Yes," he confessed, his voice steady but filled with regret. "We made the whole thing up. We didn't know Palpatine was Sidious. Yoda's spice vision of Anakin and Palpatine throwing me out a window, it was all a lie. As if I wouldn't see that coming," Mace added, with a bitter smile that didn't reach his eyes. Obi-Wan looked at Mace, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. "But why wasn't I brought in on any of this?" he asked, his voice strained. "Why was I kept in the dark when the entire council knew it was all a farce?" "Obi-Wan, you've only been on the council for a few months. Traditionally, we don't divulge dealings of this nature until a member is more settled in their position. It's not a matter of trust, but rather a way of ensuring that new council members are comfortable with the responsibilities and the complexities of our decisions. Obi-Wan's face hardened slightly, but Mace continued before he could respond. But, Mace added, the Force works in mysterious ways. Because we didn't bring you in on the full situation, you came up with the idea for the holocam meeting. And because of that, the Sith is dead. Sidious is gone, and the galaxy is safer because of it. Obi-Wan absorbed Mace's words, the conflicting emotions within him refusing to settle. The justification seemed hollow, a way to rationalize the deception, but the outcome was undeniable. Still, the bitterness of being kept in the dark gnawed at him. If you think this is bad, wait till you hear why Dooku actually left the Order, Master Kenobi, Ki-Adi added, as Obi-Wan stared at the ceiling. And then they all lived happily ever after. Well, not Yoda, as he became one with the Force a standard week later after crashing his speeder. Of course, there was also the matter of the clones and the Clone Wars still raging on. So what do you think happened after this? Anyways, if you want early access to these videos and mini what-ifs, like what if a fly flew into Palpatine's mouth during his speech, check out my Patreon for just $1 or more a month. I'd also like to thank those of you who are already supporting the channel through Patreon and channel memberships. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. What if Palpatine had a heart attack while fighting Mace Windu?